Thank you for attending our education book discussion with Dawn Taylor today. I'm Jenna Robinson, president of the James G. Martin Center for Academic Renewal. The Martin Center is a nonprofit organization dedicated to excellence and accountability in higher education. We advocate responsible governance, viewpoint diversity, academic quality, cost-effective education solutions, and innovative market-based reform. You can find out more at jamesgmartin.center. Thank you to our viewers and donors for making events like this possible. Although this event is free, we appreciate those of you who made voluntary contribution. Your support fuels everything we do. The Martin Center's education book discussions are quarterly online events with authors of recent or sort of recent books about higher education or related topics, or in today's case, a not yet published book. Before we get started, I want to tell you about our next webinar. It will feature 3 professors whose stories appear in a new book by Nicholas Wolfinger, Professors Speak Out: The Truth About Campus Investigations. That event will take place on May 22nd from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern Time, and we'll put the link to register in the chat. I'll hand the floor over to Professor Taylor shortly, but I want to take 1 minute to tell you about how this event will run. First, Professor Taylor will talk about his new forthcoming book for a few minutes. Then my colleague George will begin a discussion with Professor Taylor, alternating between his own questions and questions from the audience. So viewers on Zoom, please post your questions by using the Q&A icon at any time. So if you have a question now, you can go ahead and put it in the Q&A. And viewers on Facebook, simply post your questions in the comments section, and we'll be sure to monitor those as well. Also, we are recording this event, so you can watch it later or share it online. We'll be sure to send you the link as soon as the video is posted. Again, thank you for being here and supporting our work. We hope to see some of you at future events as well. So the book we're talking about today is Renewing the Marketplace of Ideas on Elite University Campuses, a forthcoming book by Professor Dawn Taylor. The book will describe how the marketplace of ideas on elite college campuses can be improved using existing resources. Professor Taylor's goal is to provide a plausible plan to make things better. The book will focus on the undergraduate student body at elite universities, the faculty who teach them, and the importance of the campus marketplace of ideas. The book's author is Dawn Taylor, a professor of public policy in the Stanford School of Public Policy at Duke University. He also writes an excellent Substack called Two Ditches, which we'll also be sure to put in the chat. Professor Taylor, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So, and certainly anybody that has the opportunity to actually speak to me, call me Don, please. Professor Taylor, this is my 28th year on faculty at Duke, but the phrase or the title still makes me a little nervous sometimes. But I am, I'll just give you a little intro about myself, and then I'm going to show one slide, talk through some ideas and how I got to working on this book. And this is very much a work in progress. This is my 28th year at Duke. I went to UNC when I moved into Winston Dorm in 1986. If you would have told me that I'd be a professor at Duke, I probably would have said that I would rather starve than do that. But I love Duke. And actually, Duke is a North Carolina success story. And I'm from Eastern North Carolina and spent my summers harvesting tobacco. And it bothers me when Duke is not understood as a North Carolina success story, but that's a different topic. I teach in the Stanford School of Public Policy. Health policy is my thing, but I am writing this book basically because the last 7 years I have come to. Can folks see that screen that I just shared?
It's coming up right now.
Yeah. So basically, the last 7 years, I have had a job at Duke that were leadership posts. I spent 2 years as the elected leader of the faculty, so chair of the academic council. So that's the leader of like 2,200 faculty members at Duke. You want to talk about an impossible job? Trying to represent 2,200 faculty members' perspective is the definition of impossible. But it was so much fun because I learned so much about the corners of the university, meaning the parts that I'd never gone to before. And it helped me. I think, kind of love the university more than I did even before. Then after that, I spent 5 years as the director of the Social Science Research Institute, and my job there was providing infrastructure primarily for other people's research. And basically, the first 20 years at Duke, my head was down and I was doing my research. And I really didn't pay much attention to the types of issues that I'm talking about today. In fact, if I went back 15 years ago, I would say the idea that I would work on something like this would just not have interested me. So I don't know what that means. Maybe it means I got bored. Maybe it means I got old. Maybe it just means one of the cool things about working at a university is you get a chance to do different types of things. But after these 7 years, I decided this is really what I wanted to work on. And I just wanted to talk through a couple of thoughts and ideas that I've got. Um, and first and foremost, I think the most important thing to think about in terms of an idea about the university is that basically it's a clash of equality. Any question can be asked, but hierarchy. All answers are not the same. And I think civil discourse is good. Like Duke has all sorts of programs on civil discourse. Certainly don't hear me to say that we need more fighting, but civil discourse that pushes us away from looking for the truth is actually that defeats the purpose of having a university. There will be huge conflict on what the truth is because disciplines frame how to study questions in different ways. And so, that give and take is just inevitable. And it's actually what makes the university an interesting place, at least to me. Um, One of the things is so it's a sociological fact that faculty are more liberal than the average person or whatever in the United States. There's been all kind of folk who have done studies of how people are registered to vote or some ideology scores or whatever. So that's just a sociological fact. And it's interesting, though, in what faculty care the most about, which is their research, they tend to be inherently conservative. And that is, just think about the null hypothesis. The null is that there is no effect. And so you have to reject the null to make the case that knowledge or evidence should move forward. So it's just a in spite of the fact that faculty are more liberal than average, maybe even a lot more liberal than average, I would argue that in terms of the thing that is most important to most faculty, which is research, the university is probably among the most conservative institutions in our society, with the very most basic meaning of that word, meaning to make new evidence, you have to make the case why what has come before should be overturned, essentially, or added to. Um, I am focusing on undergrads. There's plenty interesting to be discussed about master's students or professional schools or PhD students. I just think those relationships are more inherently transactional. And so I've just kind of putting those to the side. I think in terms of when the marketplace of ideas is broken on campus, like I think it fairly obviously is. And I assume most anybody that would come to this type of event would assume that as well. So I'm not going to spend that much time there, but we could go to it if you would like. And I think there's both a private good and a public good problem to be fixed or addressed. And the private good problem is my friend Mike Munger, says he tells faculty that he says are not teaching multiple sides of an issue. You're not actually training students well. You're depriving them. You're providing, or we are providing, if we do that, a substandard product, so to speak. So that's a kind of a private good problem. And a public good problem, if you just think of all the treasure invested in a place like Duke, I mean, it's just vast resources. And I think if we went back to, certainly to, the GI Bill, certainly into the 70s and 80s, I think most people probably thought of an individual that they did not know getting an undergraduate degree as being a public good. It produced some good to people, even if you didn't know that person or you didn't directly benefit. And I think, it's not clear at all that that at least a part of our society not only wouldn't hold that view, but would doubt it. And one of the things that I have just kind of been sitting in since the beginning of Trump, administration 2.0, and the the various um, things that they have been doing for, especially to elite universities, the glee, and I think it's the right word, but people that I know um, who have said things like, I like you, you're a fine guy, yada, 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 whatever. But man, you guys really deserve a kick in the ass. And so it just, that's a signal of type of, folk doubting whether we are worth it. And with it being just all the treasure that universities have. I think at the heart of the marketplace of ideas problem is this paradox, which is that faculty have incredibly robust ways of fighting intellectually. So, like if I think of I'll give you an example. Some of you probably know Chris Conover. He's a health policy guy. He's a friend of mine. We've had many times we've been asked to come and be one side versus the other on all sorts of things. And so sometime 7 or 8 years ago, I wrote a piece in the North Carolina Medical Journal called Medicaid Expansion, the Case For, and Chris wrote Medicaid Expansion, the Case Against. And so he and I are easily capable of debating this. We know how to understand each other's research methods, and even if we really come down to quite different policy notions, basically we understand how hard it is to do good research and how imperfect pretty much all the research is, and those sorts of things. Perhaps the biggest failure in the marketplace of ideas is the faculty who enjoy these robust systems of how to work things out, and what they care about the most have not managed to produce something like that for our undergraduate students. And a couple things about that I had never really thought about until the last few months, well, the last few years, I mean. Um, it is actually much easier to be an expert in one narrow thing than it is to be open-minded and learn how to debate and discuss many topics. And so it's not easy. And so it brings me to the point of, I think the most important thing that faculty can do in teaching is actually to provide examples of when we have changed our minds based on evidence and what is most important to us. And some of the things that we've changed our minds on might be totally esoteric to the students, like they may not even care. So, like if they're taking a class in Old Testament, a professor may say, I used to think that Josephus had copied from somebody else, and later I read this and I changed my mind. The kids might be like, what the heck is he talking about? But I might say, I had this large demonstration program or project. I really hope that we could show that palliative care provided well before hospice could both reduce costs and improve quality of life, but the p-value didn't prove it. So I really believed it, but I share with the students, just as an introduction to a topic, I had to make the case, I had to earn the evidence. So I didn't do that. So I don't get to just say, no, 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 it really is the case that I've proven that, because I had not done so. And so then if students are taking a broad education, and fact, again, I'm not talking about massive changes or of curriculum. I'm just talking about faculty spending a bit more time thinking about changing of one's mind, thinking about evidence, and using examples where we demonstrate to our students that we have changed our minds and what is most important to us. And I think setting expectation, not just for the students, but really for us ourselves and all of us, is if we're never really changing our minds about anything, um, it probably means we're not thinking very well, or we're not thinking broadly enough, or I, I don't know. It's just it's trying to bring that into undergraduate education, and maybe that sounds overly simplistic, but I think what has happened is since I've been at Duke, I'll give you an example. When I first came to Duke, I was assigned 10 freshman students that I met the day they moved into the dorm, helped them pick classes, and then also had undergraduate, and then also had public policy majors once they had, decided they wanted to major in public policy. Um, and now those jobs have been almost totally professionalized. They're very earnest people who really care about the kids, and they help them. But it meant that the students or excuse me, it meant that the faculty, and I'm talking about myself, really got kind of pulled away from the undergrads. And I think that has had effects that are not good. Um, I I just think it's something that has, and the other thing I should say is or let me just talk about myself. I went willingly, like somebody saying you no longer have to have 10, first year students to help figure out classes. And if something goes bad, they're going to call you up. And now in Sanford School, we're going to professionalize advising. So you're really only going to have to really advise students who are in your narrow area of interest. That sounds like a great deal to faculty, because then we get to go do what we enjoy most, which is our research. But I just don't think it's good for the marketplace of ideas. So I can let me just say this about 90 more seconds, and then we'll have questions. These other issues, Duke in 2008 massively expanded financial aid, like really massively expanded it. And it happened, right in the financial crisis. It was a difficult thing. Duke kept doing it. It actually did lead to a major diversification of the student body on just about every imaginable metric. One of the things that I think we failed at is I think we were so busy congratulating ourselves about that. We didn't think enough about what it meant that all of a sudden we were bringing 250 students from international, other countries, meaning they graduated high school from another country, came to Duke as first year student. We not only had racial, ethnic, religious diversity, but economic diversity. We didn't think enough about how do you enfold folks into the campus. Then I mentioned the professionalization. I think a reality is that nothing disrupts the campus like a racist event, whether it's, when somebody, drew a swastika on Duke's Expression Bridge, or there was a noose hung in front of the Mary Lou Williams Center for Black Culture. Nothing will disrupt a campus like that. I think how to balance protection versus saying that free expression is just about as important a value as we have is a tricky issue. And then finally, I've been thinking about this, like why exactly was the post October 7th Hamas, attack of Israel and the subsequent military action against Gaza? Why was that so hot on campus? And I'm still working through with that. So I stopped the share. I hope that at least made some sense. And I think the plan is that George, you're going to ask some questions, and then other folk on the webinar can ask questions.
I think that is exactly the plan, Don. Glad to have you with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Um, Let me start with an observation. I've been focused on higher education policy since 1999. And it is my observation, it was my observation back then, and that's been reinforced greatly ever since, that many colleges and universities, the curriculum has become loaded with courses reflecting the interests and goals of activist, progressive faculty members. Their objective is not so much to investigate topics in an academic manner, considering evidence from all angles, but rather to inculcate their beliefs in students. And administrators, mostly in sympathy with the views of the faculty, have given them almost a completely free hand to teach what and how they please. Consequently, many students receive a steady stream of criticism of our foundational values. The Constitution system of limited government, for example, is routinely disparaged as a result of racism. And economic liberty, which is to say capitalism, is attacked as inequitable. Rarely do students hear any counter argument against those positions. Now, do you think that's a somewhat accurate assessment?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a caricature, but caricatures usually have, some elements of truth within them. If I were going to try to crystallize, because there are a lot of things that were in that question, pretty broad framing. I think it is that I would say the following: academic freedom is a profoundly important um, something to defend for the university. What you're describing is an abuse of academic freedom, meaning, um, meaning if I'm assigned to teach matrix algebra, I shouldn't talk about I shouldn't talk about anything other than matrix algebra. And maybe that's a bad example, but similarly, if I'm, assigned to teach a class in health policy, then I would have, um, academic freedom to determine how to do that. I One thing I would say in my experience at Duke, and I was thinking we had talked about this before. I haven't seen as much of this in my department, and I think it possibly is because we have a large major, and so there's not that much um, sort of slack elective classes. By slack, I mean where somebody says you get to teach whatever you want. So like my research interest is aging and long-term care policy. Now, I give you a hint. There are not that many 19-year-olds particularly interested in that. Okay. I don't understand why it's terrible, but it's true. So I haven't taught that elective since 2011. So basically, I don't teach that. And I mostly teach core classes because somebody's got to teach the core classes. And so then in our department, for the intro and the core classes, we have these agreed, you know, um, types of things that have to be covered. So it will be hard for that to happen. But I think we can, if we went to fire or different organizations, we can find examples of where what you
Yes.
have described has happened. So obviously, it's not the null set. I don't think it's the most common set, but it's not the null set. And I've been thinking of like, what's the best way to deal with that? A lot of times when I hear things like that happen, and this may sound like a weird thing to say, but my first thought is, did that faculty member not have a friend on the faculty to say, you actually kind of overcooking what you're doing here? So I think the faculty are probably need to and have to take more seriously the making sure that we are not only defending academic freedom, which is important, but not abusing it. And like a dean is probably pretty removed. It's really the job of chair of an academic department is really important in a university. So it's I think it's a collective problem, meaning faculty need to self-correct our friends and colleagues, so to speak,
Mhm.
because um, I, I you know, it hurts everybody. Well, first it hurts the students if you're not teaching in an appropriate way. So obviously you want to be teaching, you know, kids how to think, not trying to tell them what to think. So I don't think that description's the most common, but as I said, it's not a null set. And I think that's part of some of the glee that has been seen. And I don't know, maybe glee is too strong of a word, but it's why people are saying, well, things really do need to change.
Apropos of that point, a friend of mine who teaches at George Mason, Dan Klein, quite a few years ago wrote a paper about groupthink in
Mm,
academia. And his observation was that departments can tend to become all one sided um, because the existing faculty members like having people around them who agree. And so they screen out anyone who offers dissenting points of view. And that, I think, explains why, as you pointed out, Don, it's somewhat uncommon for a professor to be reined in or rebuked or even just slightly scolded by his colleagues. You know, you're going over the top. You're edging into the realm of indoctrination. They don't like to do that because that gets in the way of their collegiality. Right or wrong?
it depends on the departments. Like the economists love the fight, so they don't care about collegiality. So there's like a three-dimensional thing going. Do you fight or not in a discipline? Is there truly hegemony? Um, yeah, I don't, I mean, if you have a group of people that are similar and I mean, they're going to be at risk of that anyway. Um, I think that like this may the Sanford School is a very unusual school because it's a school that's a department, and so it's this big chaotic department, which actually causes some problems, but it gets away from some of what you just discussed. Um, because like let's imagine a health policy scholar comes up for tenure and you get a sociologist to write a letter. You have to get 6 arm's length letters from other universities. You get a sociologist, a historian, and an economist. Now, the historian thinks books are home runs.
Mhm.
Sociologists might write books, might write papers. The economist probably writes papers. And so all of a sudden it can be complicated because it's harder to get slam dunk tenure cases. Now that is scary for assistant professors, but it's possible that it could at the margin be producing slightly more, um, slightly more intellectually, different ways of looking at the world. Um, Another thing I think is there's very much a issue of selection of faculty that are similar. I think a lot of times what faculty are really selecting on, again, depending on the department, is actually methodological. So, um, you know, like qualitative versus quantitative research methods or things like this. And so that actually may be one of the ways that the selection effect is operating. It's not, it might not be perfectly correlated with, I guess, what people would call viewpoint diversity, but you know, it might be. I don't know if that just sounds all too, that there are a lot of things going on in selecting new faculty. I will say the reason deans are not ever gonna do much about this is most deans want to be provost and most provosts want to be presidents. So they're not, they're trying to bring some new plan or program, like a new hiring initiative. And they're saying we want, like right now Duke is doing, you can guess, AI and everything. So there's this cluster hire, and I think we're supposed meant to, I don't know how many faculty, but like we're meant to be hiring like AI and classics and AI and statistics and AI whatever. That's the kind of thing that deans use to go and say, now I'm going to be a provost. So they're probably not going to get so involved down in those some of the issues that we were talking about before. That's why it's probably going to have to be the chair. It's just that's kind of an inside baseball thing, I think.
Let's go to an audience question. Do you think that the new budget pressures on elite universities will cause a decline in professionalization of undergraduate teaching and bring tenure track faculty back into the classroom?
Yeah, I think probably yes, and not just into the classroom, but I think into the intellectual just mix of the undergraduate students. So I think that there's all sort of different cost pressures underway, and that is going to lead to changes. I'll give you just a very, very practical example. The questioner asked about back into the classroom. When Sanford School was a department in arts and sciences at Duke, which we became a school about 15 years ago. When we were a department in arts and sciences, the normal teaching load was 2 and 2 for either a tenured or a tenure track faculty. So 2 in the fall, 2 in the spring. When we became a school, a big part of the selling point to the faculty was our teaching load dropped from 4 in a year to 3 in a year. So a simple way to address budget problems for the Sanford School, and hear me, I'm not speaking for I'm not the dean, I'm not speaking for the dean, but a simple thing would be just say, let's just go back to 4 course teaching load. Now, the faculty will hate that because they would rather do their research than teach. And there's some people that's not true of, but most of them are not going to go to be at Duke. They're going to be Davidson or Williams or these other great universities. So, one thing so I think the questioner is probably the answer is yes, that's going to happen. And that's, I think it's a fact. It's probably at the margin good. I would have hated it when I was 35. I'm 57. I've actually come to really enjoy teaching the most introductory classes, which when I taught intro to public policy in 2002, 2003, 2004, I hated it because it's hard and time consuming. And if you have 150 kids, anyway, it's just you have 10 TA, it's just hard. And but now I, I don't know. So I'm not sure. We used to do it. When I say we, I mean Sanford School, where the assistant professors taught the nastiest classes because once you got tenure, it's kind of like, we're not going to do that anymore. About 7 years ago, we explicitly decided to flip that. And so like I went back and started, like I taught the intro class in 2022 for the first time since 2013. So now we're putting full professors into the basic classes. Yeah, it's just a change in perspective, which I think is probably positive.
Mhm. All right, I'll ask another question. There are courses that are being taught. You read about them pretty often, as Jen and I do, that are really blatantly ideological, taught from a one sided standpoint. For example, courses on Middle East where the professor has a one side is right and the other side is wrong perspective, almost invariably anti Israel these days. Now, do you think it would be appropriate for college leaders to stop approving of such a courses and perhaps even to try to cancel existing ones that are so unbalanced?
Yeah, I think that we shouldn't be teaching unbalanced courses for sure. Um, um, I think actually it should never get to the dean, the chair, and they should be dealing with it. That's just my way of thinking about how this should be addressed. Um, I think that let me say a couple. So I don't think it is legitimate for a faculty member to berate students or um, you know to to give a totally one-sided perspective. um I think, like, I worry some about is I worry not necessarily about this, but so when the Trump administration is talking about they want to root out anti-Semitism, like, I'm a little skeptical about the motives, but I actually also want to root out anti-Semitism. So I'm ready to join them in the journey, so to speak, in all kinds of, racism. So that I think takes me back to what I said earlier is we need to deal with stuff better than we have been doing it to, sort of not enable some of these sort of illiberal ways of addressing it to take place. I, and just about the thing in the Middle East, I teach one of the classes I teach is ethics of public policy, just a basic general ethics class. It's got like a textbook in ethics, Schaefer Landau's just introduction to ethics. It's, there are many textbooks like that. And then we have topics. And we had a unit uh, about Israel, Palestine, and we focused it from 1883, which was one of the first most modern Ottoman census of what was then called Palestine up through, the current. And what I try to do and what I think is a good practice is the hotter the topic, meaning politically, and the students, upset with each other, the more important it is to put students into primary sources. And
Mhm.
so what I did with the 1883 Ottoman census, and they're actually, this is pretty esoteric stuff, right? I mean, it's been translated to English, but, I say, okay, this group has to investigate this part of the land and that part. And they had to report back how many Jews, how many Christians, how many Armenians, how many, this type of thing. And so they kind of discover, they're like, wow, there weren't that many Jewish people, but there were Jewish people. But man, there's a jumble of folks that were living in today what we call Israel and West Bank. And then you march them through, Theodore Herzl, Rise of Modern Zionism, 1898. And then you let them look at the 1907 census and the 1912 census, and they can see, oh, look, Jewish folks started, buying land, and they were buying it from whoever, owned it. And so you can see it rising. And then you get the British coming in after World War II, and the Ottoman Empire goes away. And you've got Churchill's 1922 letter, the Peel report, UN 181, and all of a sudden the students, I think, especially the students that had super duper strong notions, all of a sudden realize, this is actually a little more complicated than I
Yeah.
thought it was. It didn't mean that I don't think there's anybody that completely changed their mind. And you wouldn't necessarily expect that, but so I think primary sources are important. I also think that when faculty get themselves in trouble, and by trouble, I mean, I think overstepping academic freedom, meaning taking it to a place that is not really warranted. Usually they're operating outside of what their area of expertise is, but maybe not always. But so it's something that they've become interested in. And the more you know about something, the more conflicted you are about it. So, like when I give a lecture about the impact of palliative care on cost of healthcare, it's like, on this hand, on that hand, on that hand, on this hand, but something that I'm, not as upfront on, I might be more likely to kind of step on and be very clear in a way that's unwarranted. Let me give an example of a mistake I made just to show what I mean faculty can do. About a year ago, I was teaching a health policy class. I came into class early. Some kids were there. They were talking about decarbonization. They were talking, and I was setting up the slides or whatever. And I said to them, "You guys realize, don't you, there's no hope of decarbonization without a re-embrace of nuclear energy." And like, I'm not an expert in nuclear energy. I actually happen to think that mostly because of looking at investments and business opportunities. But when I said it, it was like somebody took a pot of cold water and dumped it in a boiling pot. They just stopped. And so these kids were doing their thing, man. They were into it. And I probably thought they were being a little over the top about what they were saying, but that was inappropriate. I mean, it just, for one thing, I'm not a expert in nuclear energy. And this was a class in health policy. And I actually went back to them and apologized and a few days later. But that's an example of we faculty need to be super cautious when we're getting away from the thing we know the best. Because usually, if we know the thing we know the best, we drive people crazy because we'll never give a straight answer. We're just waffling on this hand, on that hand, on the 15th hand kind of thing. So,
All right, let me ask you this. I think we're both somewhat skeptical that sticks will work to try to stop the problem of over politicized courses. But what about carrots? Namely, seeking to hire applicants who show that they are really committed to teaching without bias, to treating things as academic questions where you can ask questions, introduce evidence without the fear of being reamed out and canceled. Should elite colleges and non-elite ones as well start looking for those people who make that commitment,
yeah,
make that the bias in favor of people who treat things as academic questions?
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, yes, I actually think that's what most faculty at least will say they do. So, um,
But
my
maybe should look for evidence that they're actually doing it, and not just saying but doing it.
yeah, yeah, y- yeah. I think, like, if I'm thinking of hiring junior faculty, um, they, I guess I'm a little, I think the last thing you said, which is look for evidence of it, that's probably more important than asking them to say a statement about it, because I think they'll
Right.
all say
Like a
that.
diversity statement.
Yeah, yeah. So like, I mean, Duke doesn't have that as a requirement, but
Mhm.
yeah. So anytime you say you have to write about whatever, it probably turns into some kind of performative, type of thing.
Sure.
But it's certainly the case that all faculty, because we're human beings, are bringing all kind of biases to our job every day. And it's important just to realize that and to try not to make the same mistake just kind of over and over again.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have, if you if we're saying there's somebody whose goal is to indoctrinate, then that's probably going to be, pretty hard um, to change. Uh, but I was thinking, like I said this to you, when I was a brand new assistant professor at Duke in not 1898, 1998, I was walking across campus on the first day of class and I met this kid that was in my class that day. And we were chatting and I was trying to meet him where he is and that kind of thing. And I asked him, what position you play on the football team? And he said, I don't play football. I'm not an athlete. And it was a very fit black young man.
Hmm.
And, he dropped the class. So I never really got to follow up with him. And I think actually, basically, what I was telling him was that I assumed because he's a fit young black man, that's the only way he could be at Duke.
Uh-huh.
That was not my intent, but that was his experience.
Yeah.
And so that whenever we faculty are bringing our stuff, whatever it is, and that was a really that was a bad thing. And so if we're doing that type of thing to any student, that's bad. If it's about ideology, if it's about religion, anything. So I I I think one great thing about the U.S. higher education system is faculty are incentivized to be creative and go after things. And sometimes that produces great, outcomes. But I think we often view ourselves as total free agents, meaning we're more given to whatever it is that we're very interested in than we are even to a university. And we faculty need to do a better job of, I guess, kind of holding each other accountable.
Hmm.
It's Yeah, we need to do a better job of holding each other accountable. I think like Sanford School went back to every year the a dean or having a one-to-one annual review with all faculty, regardless of how long they've been there. Now, in one sense, if you were the dean, that'd be a real pain in the ass because it's like 70 something people or something like that. But it at least is bringing the idea of last year you said this was your goal for your teaching, and has that happened? And then it's actually matched up with the teaching evaluations, which are imperfect because most kids don't fill them out. And but there's some steps like that that I think are probably pretty good practices. I mean, part of my problem is, or the reality is, I've been at Duke for 28 years. I don't have any experience at another university. So my experience is narrowed in that way.
Let's go back to the audience. We have a couple of questions. Here's one. Do you think that professors, when lecturing and writing, fail to acknowledge the bias that they harbor to their detriment?
Um, yeah, sure. I mean, I guess blind spots are blind, right? But certainly, hopefully, we're looking for them. We're open to it being places where we've screwed up or messed up. Um, yeah, I mean, faculty, the university says you can ask any question, but every answer is not the same, and we base that on evidence. So if we're doing something that's not that, then it's against the idea of the university. So it's definitely to the detriment of the faculty member if it's kind of helping them, live a lie, so to speak, or at least part of one, and it's bad for the kids. So I think in terms of writing, I would be most worried about that problem with teaching, in part because, like even the thing that I said, where I said, "Oh, you kids would have no hope without nuclear energy," that's something that's said like that can really kind of leave a mark. And I mean, who knows? Maybe that made the student think, "Oh, who knows when Professor Taylor is going to step on us for something else." I mean, I don't think that is the case, but it could be. But yeah, I mean, super, one thing that's super interesting is this question of, do we need more politically conservative faculty? And so Mike Munger and I, who's a good friend of mine, Mike in his first semester as an assistant professor at UNC taught me my first semester as a graduate student. So I've known him for a long time. If you think he's crazy now, you should have seen him back then. But
I've known him a long time. Yeah.
yeah. He had the crazy hair and he came in anyway. Um, but I was asking him, do we need more conservative professors? And he was saying, no, we need to actually follow what we say we do and stick to the evidence. And I agree with that, but it would be better if we did have more conservative professors, meaning I don't, it's just, I think it's part of why, now it's part of why there's doubt about the value of the university. I've been thinking a little bit about this. Like I've been, as part of this book, I've been reading some evaluations of like programs to recruit women for STEM, or programs like the Mellon Mays Foundation has a pretty successful program that has raised the number of African Americans that got PhDs and things like that. And so if you start saying, are we going to have figure out a program? How do you get conservative faculty? It's a tricky issue because if we're picking, women in STEM, the selection is pretty straightforward. But if we're trying to say, how are we going to have faculty be conservative voices? Basically, we're saying, how are we going to convince people when they're 22 to commit their life to being a faculty member? So when they're 42, they'll be a full professor who's a conservative voice. It's just a trickier, like I mean, if somebody's got it's just it's a trickier problem, I think. It's a trickier problem to be dealt with via recruitment.
Mhm,
Or,
mhm.
and then when I think of, and this is, this is anecdotal, but I've been thinking of, I've had two students in the last, one was about 15 years ago, another about a decade ago, that were very gifted researchers that I came to supervise their undergraduate honors thesis. And, and I said to both of them, you seem to have affinity for research and like the process, and maybe you should go to graduate school and you could be a faculty member. And so I've had that conversation with many students over the years. The two that I'm thinking about were both students who had, spoken to me about the problem. They were defining it as a problem of there not being more politically conservative faculty. Okay. So they were self-identifying this. And I was saying, what was it? President Obama said, be the change you want to see, or something like that. I said, well, go to graduate school. And they both said, no way, I can't make enough money. So I don't know. I mean, that's just two people, but there's, so I'm not sure how to. That's only two people, but those are two students who I thought had great affinity in research, and like I actually love the process of research. I really like enjoy the the solitary but feeding information to a team, piecing together something. But I mean, it's yeah, I don't know. I think I'm not sure how to deal with that issue. I'm not sure how to make it so in 25 years the breakdown of how people are registered to vote or ideology surveys has changed. I'm really not sure.
Let's go to this question. Do you think that student evaluations of courses provide useful evidence of teaching quality?
No,
No.
no. I mean, no. I I don't the best way to judge teaching quality, I think, is to take courses and have it be judged by people to give pointers and tips. And I know in tenure reviews now, both for a junior, a third year review, and then a tenure review, two faculty go and watch a junior professor teach and make comments about it. So, I mean, conceptually, it should be the case that teaching evaluations should be important, but students mostly don't fill them out. There, it's just it's imperfect. I don't know. I mean, some of you, I don't know if any of you saw me. I was the professor that didn't give Riley Leonard, the Duke football star, the extension on the homework after they upset Clemson 2 years ago. And my youngest son texted me and said, "Dad, my professors are in the toilet after you did that." So they end up, and finally my professor wrote me and said, "We are going to have to take your site down because it's just being pounded because you didn't let the quarterback turn in his homework late." It was anyway. So, but no, I don't think they're that useful. I wish they were. I'm not sure how to do it better.
Well, I think we have time for at least one more question. Here it is. If academic freedom is the expression of sincere opinion or belief in the pursuit of truth, where is a place in higher education, if any, where academic freedom is not warranted?
Not warranted meaning because the answer to something is so clear that we don't allow dis dispute from it or something like that.
That could be. That could be. Is there any place where academic freedom should be curtailed?
Well, I mean, legally, so academic freedom is not the same thing as First Amendment protection. Academic freedom is part of a employment contract.
Yeah.
But if we thought of the First Amendment prohibition against government blocking speech or freedom of assembly, which is the two parts that are closest to academic freedom, um, I think in general, the best antidote for bad speech is more speech and better speech. Um, like they're true threats, that's a First Amendment. So if you say something that's a true threat, like you can't threaten a student or you can't make a true threat. I mean, legally. So that would be a type of assault or instigation to violence. So I guess that would be an example where legally it would be truncated. Um, like I don't think if somebody like I think so if RFK Jr. wanted to come and say ivermectin will is a magic drug and it'll prevent all kind of stuff. Man, I don't think there's very much evidence of that, but I wouldn't say that he can't say it. I just think, yeah. So and even like probably the closest thing, like the swastika. It's hard to imagine that ever having a. So like when somebody painted a swastika on Duke's Free Expression Bridge and the university covered it up. So I think that's legitimate. It's just I just don't think there's a way that the swastika could ever be understood to be a reasonable, because it's this symbol of, genocidal annihilation.
Sure.
But I'd rather make the mistake in the direction of people saying things that were bad than over
Sure.
stopping from
Sure.
saying them.
Don, we thank you very much. We've used up our time. We'll be looking for that book of yours eventually.
Eventually, yeah.
Keep us posted about that, your
I will.
progress on the book.
I will. Thank you.
And on behalf of the Martin Center, thanks to everyone for tuning in.